The year is 1951, and the United States is at the peak of its post-war optimism. An Allied victory successfully reshaped Western Europe to the designs of the West, but an Iron Curtain was slowly growing before the East. A large factor playing into an American victory in World War II was the country's advanced intelligence gathering capabilities, and a nation now terrified of the Soviets hoped to leverage this to their advantage. Almost as soon as the war ended, President Truman signed the National Security Act into law, forming the United States Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. A rising star in this new agency was a man who proved himself to be a master of espionage and intelligence gathering during the war, a guy called Allen Dulles. Dulles was brought into the agency to oversee covert intelligence operations in a role the CIA dubbed the Deputy Director for Plans, which is honestly a sick thing to have on your business card. That beats the hell out of Mark Zuckerberg's "I'm CEO, bitch." But anyway, after just a few months at the CIA, Dulles was promoted to Deputy Director after dedicating himself to top-secret Project Artichoke. Now, what is Project Artichoke, you might ask? Well, it was a covert experiment run by the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence to determine whether or not brainwashing, hypnosis, and clandestine druggings could get a civilian to involuntarily commit a high-profile assassination, essentially using them as an unwitting operative. In fact, this CIA memo from 1952 just about sums up Project Artichoke. Can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against the fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation? The operation's first test subjects were Korean prisoners of war, but the testing quickly expanded to friendly agents of the CIA themselves, with one CIA agent being covertly dosed with LSD for 77 days. Biological weapons and other pathogens were a big part of Artichoke's operations, with one memo reading, "Not all viruses have to be lethal. The objective includes those that act as short-term and long-term incapacitating agents." And if you think all of this is crazy, stick around because this is still the introduction to our main story today. Operation Midnight Climax. I'm Max from Those History Guys, and let's go ahead and get right into it. The infamous Project Artichoke eventually morphed into the much more successful and well-known project MKUltra. People claim that the MK in the name is a completely arbitrary prefix, but I'm slightly convinced that it stands for mind control and spelled like that because, as we'll soon see, this is some serious Nazi science. It's no secret that after World War II, America absorbed much of Germany's science and actual scientists. In fact, landing on the moon probably wouldn't have happened without the Nazi-turned-American scientist Werner Magnus Maximilian Werner von Braun. A lot of what we're going to discuss today has a similar origin story. In the early 40s, Nazi scientists carried out numerous experiments at concentration camps with captives who were dosed with psychedelic drugs. The goal of these experiments was to develop a truth serum that would remove any and all agency and free will from a dosed subject. Some of these Nazi scientists, like a man called Kurt Bloom, eventually became involved in MKUltra as the United States shared Germany's hopes of unlocking this population control serum. Now, you might be wondering, how did Dulles' CIA even get away with something like this in the first place? Well, this is thanks in large part to Dulles' own brother being appointed to Secretary of State in 1953. That same year, Dulles gave a speech to Princeton alumni in which he stressed the urgency of the United States to win the race to control the brain, framing it as a race with the Soviets, rather than a technology that the CIA itself was trying to pioneer. A large portion of this technology was pioneered by a man called Sidney Gottlieb, who, to his credit, was not a Nazi and had actually tried LSD himself before dosing other people with it, which is something, I guess. Gottlieb, alongside Dulles, was the master behind the earlier Project Artichoke, and it only made sense for them to be brought into MKUltra to spearhead the subject of today's video, Operation Midnight Climax. An operation contained inside of Project MKUltra itself, Gottlieb's clandestine experiment was aimed at seeing what would happen when unwitting subjects were given two things that are well known to return man to ape: sex and drugs. Specifically, the CIA wanted to see if sexual blackmail, druggish potions, and covert surveillance could allow for this mind control that the CIA was looking for. Well, that was their stated objective. And surely an agent of the state wouldn't lie about their clandestine experiments on civilians, right? Right? Well, when the operation started, a number of prostitutes were placed on CIA payroll in cities like New York and San Francisco. The agency would pay the women per assignment to lure unsuspecting civilians back to safe houses that were owned by the CIA. According to declassified documents, these safe houses were decorated with red curtains, dim lighting, and nude paintings, imitating the style of a French brothel. In addition to the seductive decor, the safe houses were equipped with audio-video recording that was hidden in electrical outlets, and two-way mirrors, which are also called one-way mirrors, which is stupid. On the other side of the concealed glass, intelligence agents watched as the prostitutes secretly spiked the subject's drink before, shall we say, Operation Midnight Climax. So just to reiterate, agents of the state, now hidden behind what we might as well call three-way glass, especially in this scenario, watched as prostitutes got their night's pay with a dude completely oblivious to the fact that he had just taken an astronomical amount of acid. I feel like that last sentence alone was enough for YouTube to try to suppress this whole video. So, if you feel like helping the channel out, be sure to subscribe. But surely Sidney Gottlieb, the mastermind of these experiments, was able to gain some type of scientific knowledge from these rather profane adventures in science. Right? Well, as it turns out, absolutely not. If you had to guess what the combined total of real psychologists and scientists involved in this experiments were, what would it be? Well, it was zero. At least, besides Gottlieb and the architects of the experiment. There was no real data collection, no scientific method, no control groups, no real plan other than to sit behind the glass, maybe with a martini, and watch what went on in the brothel. As a result, the little structure of Operation Midnight Climax quickly degraded completely into taxpayer-funded obscenity. It didn't take long for the agents watching the brothels to start utilizing the services themselves, including dosing themselves with LSD and a myriad of other drugs. One CIA operative was also an agent of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and he infamously boasted about his fond memories with the agency during this time, saying, quote, "It was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American lie, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" Now, if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, just click off of this video. I don't even want you here, because that is like the freakiest thing I've ever heard a man put to paper before. A later FOIA request found that 2 pounds of yohimbine hydrochloride were purchased by Dr. Robert V. Lashbrook, the chief aide to Dr. Gottlieb, whose role was to, quote, monitor and approve of the materials for Operation Midnight Climax. I'm going to keep it a buck. I had no idea what yohimbine hydrochloride was, so I did have to look that one up. It's basically erectile dysfunction medication. So just so we're clear, the chief aide of this whole project was given the responsibility of monitoring and approving 2 pounds of erectile dysfunction medication ordered by the team. Now, I don't know. I wasn't there. But why would you order erectile dysfunction meds, a whole kilo of them, for your team, unless they were getting in on a little bit of that? No, you know, it was definitely for science and progress and freedom and America and fighting the communists. To the agency's credit, actually, they did try to conduct a few experiments under Project Midnight Climax, but to their discredit, they're all equally, if not even more, unethical. First, the CIA wanted to see if it was possible to send an entire building of people into a psychotic panic by poisoning their food supply. Second, the agency was curious if an amnesia potion could be brewed in order to wipe a subject's memory after an interrogation. like actual Men in Black wiping your memory kind of stuff. And this is just in a declassified this is wild. This is absolutely crazy, but it gets crazier, so just wait. Third, and don't worry, I did save the best for last, the CIA wanted to study the effects of LSD and sensory deprivation. So, in the name of beating the Soviets to it, the United States kept its own citizens in captivity for months on end, continuously dosed them with LSD, and deprived them in many cases of food and water. As the operation grew and the agents called dibs on the brothels, the tests that they were conducting expanded to include mentally disabled children and other folks that, probably aren't just frequenting a brothel. The clandestine dosing of LSD escaped the containment of these brothels and bars to the point that random civilians were unwittingly being dosed in restaurants, on beaches, and in other public areas. Now, you might be wondering, how did the CIA get its hands on so much LSD in the first place? Well, according to an agency memo, which was leaked decades after this was all over, most LSD that the CIA used was sourced from the Eli Lilly Company, the same pharmaceutical company that brought you such controversies as bovine growth hormone, failing to warn that Prozac may cause homicidal activation, artificially inflating insulin prices, and not warning of the serious side effects of GLP-1 weight loss drugs. But back to the drug involved in this controversy, lysergic acid diethylamide. Lysergic acid diethylamide. Now, the CIA never confirmed how many covert LSD doses were administered, but it's widely believed that these experiments done on the public, especially out in San Francisco, are directly responsible for the rise of the 1960s counterculture movement with new public awareness of psychedelic drugs. This is a hard thing to prove. LSD had been around for decades at this point, and human beings have been doing hallucinogenic drugs literally since we learned how to forage for plants. That being said, it's certainly possible that enough people were dosed with LSD near the San Francisco Bay that the drug was able to get a new level of popularity there. In fact, Ken Casey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and one of the merry pranksters who drove a school bus across the country, I actually kind of followed in his footsteps a little bit with that second one, he was a big public figure and a big influence in the counterculture movement, and he credits his own involvement in that with being force-fed LSD by the CIA while staying in a veterans hospital. Ken Casey was not the only American citizen to come forward with such a story, and in fact, he's not even the only famous or notable one. One of the most infamous subjects, however, was a CIA bacteriologist called Frank Olson. Editor Max here. Just for clarification, that's CIA bacteriologist, as in someone who studies bacteria, not a CIA-backed urologist. Just want to make that clear. A man employed at the agency's biochemical weapons lab. In 1953, while on a retreat with the agency, he was secretly dosed with LSD and just days later was found dead underneath a skyscraper window as if he had leapt. His death was ruled a suicide. It's incredibly unlikely that Mr. Olson was the only fatality linked to these experiments, but much of that information remains unknown or destroyed to this day. What is clear, however, is that the CIA conducted these operations for years and got extremely comfortable doing it. A blank check, no oversight, and enough LSD to fuel a psychedelic cultural movement made the top-secret clandestine operation much harder to keep under wraps. By 1963, after an entire decade of American tax dollars going towards all of this absurdity, CIA Inspector General John Ehrman released a report recommending that the agency close all of the brothels immediately. But it wasn't until 1966 that the last one was actually shuttered for good. Now it was time for the CIA to sweep all this under the rug and continue with business as usual, spying on American college students to look for anti-war sentiment. But if you sweep too much stuff under a rug, you just get a lumpy rug. And someone's either going to say, hey, that rug is lumpy, or they're going to fall flat on their face when they trip over it. Well, Gottlieb, after spearheading the operation, had piled so much stuff under his rug that his lump had become a mound. But as we know, trying to get rid of evidence can often lead to more eyes on the thing that you're trying to conceal. Just ask Barbra Streisand. And that's in large part what happened with Nixon during Watergate, and maybe why the government doesn't even try to hide corruption as much these days. Luckily for us, though, Nixon getting busted and his subsequent resignation got the American electorate in a mood to uncover the secrets that they suspected were hidden within the government. In 1974, renowned New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh wrote a front-page story with the headline, "Huge CIA operation reported in U.S. against anti-war forces, other dissidents in Nixon years." The story mainly focused on the paper's investigation uncovering CIA dossiers on tens of thousands of American citizens. Deeply concerned that American college students were harboring anti-war sentiment, the CIA had spent years infiltrating anti-war groups and collecting sensitive information on detractors. Still grappling with the corruption under President Nixon, both Congress and President Ford immediately moved to probe the spy agency, which was strictly forbidden in its founding charter from conducting internal operations on American citizens. For a country still deeply engaged in a Cold War with Russia, the idea of a federal secret police seemed antithetical to the entire ideological war being fought with the Soviets. The Baltimore Sun ran an opinion story just days after the Times report with the headline, "We don't want a Gestapo." Newspapers across the nation likened the abuses of the CIA to something that would happen in the Eastern Bloc, and the reporters were still barely scratching the surface on everything the agency had been doing up until that point. Through further digging from Congress, what were once wild conspiracy theories started to become verifiable fact. The public soon learned of CIA efforts to overthrow a number of countries in Central and South America. The Japan Times reported that the CIA was involved in establishing and growing a repressive regime in Iran, the very one the United States is currently at war with. In fact, the agent who led the espionage against American college students left his post at the CIA in 1973 to become the ambassador to Iran in Tehran. That could be a crazy deep dive for another video, so let me know in the comments if you'd like us to cover that. But for the purposes of our story, the explosion of news coverage about CIA malfeasance forced the federal government into action. Not long after the initial stories broke, Ford and the Congress established the Rockefeller Committee to audit illegal CIA activities. What they found obviously went much deeper than just spying on college kids. The very first long body section in the commission's report outlined, quote, "the testing of behavior influencing drugs on unsuspecting subjects within the United States." The committee's report also uncovered for the first time Mr. Olson's story, the man whose death was ruled a suicide after being covertly dosed. Thanks to this discovery, his remaining family was able to settle with the CIA outside of court for a generous wrongful death sum. The investigation admitted publicly that MKUltra was a real program, and the media went absolutely nuts with it. But as I mentioned earlier, almost all of the files relating to LSD programs were purposefully destroyed by the very men responsible for their creation. Well, most of them. George White, the agent who boasted about his raping and pillaging, was sent to live in the big acid brothel in the sky when he died in 1975. His widow, completely oblivious to her late husband's associations with Operation Midnight Climax, donated all of Mr. White's remaining correspondence to the Electronics Museum at Foothill Junior College. It wasn't until a Senate hearing in 1977 that the specific details about prostitution, LSD, and the agency's indulgence in such things was finally revealed to the public after a Senate investigation uncovered this forgotten archive. Unlike documents sourced directly from the CIA, White's personal memos and journals had no redactions. They were complete with names and dates and what appeared to be a cheerful recollection of White's time abusing his public office. Almost immediately, White became synonymous with Operation Midnight Climax. The agency's immense effort to hide their atrocities was undone by George White's inability to hide his truth and the joy that he took from his depravity. We know about this story only as a result of his immense record-keeping and the pride that he seemed to take from these torturous experiments on the American public. So yeah, shorter video for you guys today, but when I was reading about this, when I tell you my jaw fell on the floor, I absolutely had to write up a script and share this story because you look deeper and deeper and it just gets even crazier. And the really interesting thing is you can go on the CIA's website to all of the Freedom of Information documents that are on there, and this is all just public knowledge now. And not just this stuff, all of the MKUltra LSD experiments that I didn't even really get into a lot in this video, and all of the overthrowing of governments and all of the covert stuff that the CIA was doing during this time really ought to send a chill down your spine. So yeah, that's the story of Operation Midnight Climax. Definitely a bit of a disturbing one. But if you enjoyed, and if you want to learn more about the history that they don't teach you in history class, well, you're in the right place. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe, check out some of the videos we've already made, and stick around for new ones to come. I'm Max, and you're watching Those History Guys. YouTube thinks you'll like this video, or maybe this one. I think. I don't know. Maybe you won't.